Joe was taken away by the hastily arriving rescue team. After a long journey, she was taken to a monastery in the suburbs. Irina looked coldly as several nurses skillfully connected wires to Joe's head. Meanwhile, Henry, who woke up in the snow, picked up experimental equipment. His gaze gradually darkened, and then he raised an axe and forcefully struck the instrument, the sound of shattering echoing in the space. At this moment, Joe also fell into a deep sleep. She didn't know how long it had been before she woke up from her slumber, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings, feeling a wave of panic in her heart, especially when she found that the door was locked from the outside. The next day, Irina walked in calmly and advised Joe to relax, suggesting that she sit down and play a tune. However, Joe was only concerned about Alice in the small cabin. Irina told her that Alice had just been discharged from the hospital and was waiting for her at home. Joe shook her head, saying that the Alice they mentioned was not her daughter. "You've been hiding the truth from me, and the tranquilizers you gave me are the evidence." Irina patiently explained that when they were at the recovery center, they found out that Joe was pregnant, so they prescribed her different medication. Joe couldn't believe it and knocked over the pills in disbelief. At that moment, a low sobbing sound came from the ceiling, and Irina, with a grim expression, indicated that there was an incurable patient living upstairs. Joe gathered her courage and began to recount the contents of the recording from another world's Irina before the accident at the space station. Irina's face turned pale, and she hastily left the room. Meanwhile, back at home, Alice solemnly told Magnus that his Joe was already dead, and the current Joe was from another world. However, Magnus refused to believe such an absurd notion. The next morning at breakfast, Alice proposed to Magnus that she wanted to go to the monastery to see Joe. The consciousness-swapped Henry was escorted to the interrogation room by several officers because he had shot the commander yesterday. He insisted that he didn't fire the gun, but he couldn't explain that his consciousness had actually swapped with another Henry from a different world. The real culprit had crossed over to Joe's world. To clear his name, he suggested using a lie detector to question him. Meanwhile, in the other world, Henry was feeling on top of the world. Compared to his previous miserable life, his current existence was like paradise. He accused Joe of damaging the experimental equipment and ultimately blamed all the problems on her, attributing them to mental issues caused by space travel. Later, he received a call from Irina, who said she needed to urgently meet him, and they agreed to meet at a restaurant. Henry was thrilled to see this legendary woman because in his previous world, Irina, as the second woman to venture into space, was the goddess of all astronauts. However, Henry's expression quickly turned cold as he realized that the Irina he knew had died in an aerospace accident. The person sitting across from him was in the same situation as himself, physically in one world but mentally belonging to another. Henry's desire was for everything to remain as it was, so he asked Irina to continue concealing all the truths, which was also the reason he had destroyed the experimental equipment. Meanwhile, Joe, in the monastery, encountered an old acquaintance, a colleague she had previously worked with on the space station. Joe thought this person would understand everything she said, but to her surprise, the colleague's demeanor changed drastically. He claimed that Joe had contracted a common ailment among astronauts, constantly suspecting things around her, and insisted that she must cooperate with treatment. Furthermore, he revealed that he would soon inherit Irina's position at the command center. Enraged, Joe knocked on the door and gestured for him to leave. Before leaving, the colleague discreetly handed Joe something. When she unfolded it, she found it to be 2 keys. Later that night, she used one of the keys to unlock the door. Just as she was about to leave, Joe suddenly remembered the sobbing she had heard during the day. Quietly, she made her way upstairs, where she found a room with a closed door at the corner. Curiously, she opened the window of the door and was shocked to see 2 identical elderly men inside. Trembling with fear, Joe quickly ran back to her room because she realized that even if she escaped, she would soon be caught again. Irina was very satisfied with Joe's behavior and told her that the elderly man upstairs was the first man to venture into outer space, but he suffered from severe stress disorders. Joe understood this as a warning that if she didn't cooperate with treatment, she would also end up lonely and aging here. Meanwhile, Alice was chatting with the commander's daughter in the closet. She mentioned that Joe wasn't her real mother, which the girl envied. Alice at least had someone like a mother to accompany her, while she would never see her father again. Conversely, in another parallel dimension, Alice envied her father's safe return. After ending the video chat, both Alice emerged from the closet simultaneously. The Alice from this world asked Magnus when he would go to see Joe and casually took out a radio from the box. On the other hand, the Alice from the other world was preparing to leave this place of sorrow. While packing, she noticed the radio in the corner and tentatively pressed the play button. She wanted to talk to the Joe in the other world. However, although the Alice from this world heard the request, she did not respond. The words of her friend had made her realize that having an unfamiliar mother by her side was better than having nothing at all. Not receiving a response, she finally accepted reality. Perhaps Joe's choice back then had already said it all. Joe stayed with the Alice in this world, and she didn't leave with her. The other Alice assured Magnus that she would never mention the deceased Joe again. At this moment, Joe sat in front of the unfamiliar piano, instinctively dancing her fingers to produce beautiful melodies once again. She felt like a traveler trapped in a foreign land, longing for home but helpless. Just then, Irina pushed the door open and entered. Joe calmly asked her if she was already dead. There were actually two Irina, and Joe's situation was exactly the same as hers. Irina didn't deny it but simply stated that understanding this truth wouldn't help change the situation. The noise outside interrupted their conversation, revealing Magnus and Alice's arrival. They both went to the backyard and had an open and honest conversation. The Alice from this world displayed a maturity beyond her age. Since one person needed a daughter and the other needed a mother, they could try to act like mother and daughter, as this had already become reality. Joe's inner turmoil vanished in an instant. Why had she been agonizing over something even a child could understand? Perhaps it was time to bid farewell to the past and embrace a new life. Both worlds Magnus shared the joy in this transformation. All they hoped for was that their daughter or wife could return to normalcy and not be lost in their thoughts all the time. Now, both Alice and Joe achieved this, and the two Magnus finally got the life they wanted. However, Henry, who had undergone consciousness swapping, wasn't as fortunate. After calmly answering all the questions posed by the police following the lie detector test, he repeatedly emphasized that he didn't shoot the commander. The test results came out quickly, confirming that Henry was telling the truth. However, the police believed that it was his subjective judgment that he hadn't committed a crime, but the objective fact was the fingerprint evidence collected at the scene. Henry also faced another charge, murdering the detective investigating him on the cruise ship. Poor Henry bore the brunt of unjust accusations. On the other hand, the instigator Henry swaggered into the city center. He found the detective who had been investigating him, but in this world they had no connection. Henry affectionately hugged him before leaving the detective standing there dumbfounded. Irina, who was about to retire from her position at the space agency, keenly felt the anguish and pain Joe had experienced. So, she revealed her own crimes online. For years, she had been tasked by the authorities with concealing incidents of strange occurrences during space travel. Perhaps the unexplained phenomena witnessed by returning astronauts were indeed real, but they were covered up by her using various excuses. In another world, the commander in the hospital bed woke up, his excitement akin to experiencing a resurrection. Meanwhile, in the space station, the long-deceased Joe suddenly grabbed the photograph in front of her.